The South African apartheid was a major historical event that happened fairly recently, that is not often taught about in foreign countries outside of South Africa itself. It could be because of the recency of the event, or just because it's looked at as insignificant, although in reality, the causes of the apartheid heavily linger in the form of racism in South Africa today. But before we get too far into it, let's start from the beginning. Let's begin with defining the word apartheid. The technical definition of an apartheid is a policy or system of segregation or discrimination on the grounds of race. The word in one of South Africa's languages, Afrikaans, the word literally translates to apartness, which is exactly what it is. In the year 1948, the South African government introduced the idea of an apartheid. They called for separation and segregation of different racial groups, which got messy when biracial people were categorized into their own separate race and not incorporated into the black race, which they had been before. The majority of the population was non-white, but the race who held control of the government were the whites, so they consistently favored their own race and considered it to be the superior one. The government introduced and explained the apartheid to be an opportunity for racial equality and a chance for freedom of cultural expression. Although in reality, the apartheid was forcibly separating people of different races and forcing them to be separated from one another. They were not allowed to live in the same neighborhoods, and they had to have separate restaurants. If a restaurant owner wanted to be able to serve all races, they would be forced to apply for a permit, which told them they could legally serve all people. But unfortunately, the separation between races was not a new concept that came along with the apartheid. Segregation throughout South Africa was very apparent for many years. It mostly began when the Land Act was passed just 3 years after South Africa officially gained its independence in 1910. The Land Act forced African Americans to live on separate reserves, which completely isolated them from the rest of society. The act also illegalized sharecropping. And sharecropping was when someone could live and work on a landowner's farm, and in return, they would give away some of their crops as a term of rent. And although this practice was very confining and often left African Americans in a circle of debt, now that they were being forced to live in a sectioned out piece of land, they had little to no work and job opportunities. When World War II came around, the economy in South Africa tanked, which was not only bad for the economy, but sadly the government got even stricter with their segregation laws. To make matters worse, in the election of 1948, the South African National Party won. Why is this so bad, you might ask? Well, the National Party was a political group that was formed on the bias of white supremacy. The party was originally formed in 1914, but was not banned until later in 1997. The party won the election while using their well-known and well-liked campaign slogan of apartheid, which, as discussed before, quite literally translated to apartness. During the Nationalist Party time and power, they made it a priority to draw up lines to separate black tribes. By doing this, the government gained even more political power over them, and they weakened the tribes' powers. One of the biggest decisions made by the government was in 1915, and it was the ban on interracial and sexual intercourse between a black and a white person. To the government, this was a big no-no. The consequences were bad if a couple was caught, and even worse for the black man in the relationship. If a black man was caught with a white woman, oftentimes he would be arrested and convicted for rape. The other problem what the government saw with the sexual intercourse between a black and a white person was the outcome. If you were to have a baby, the baby's skin color would not be legally classified as either black or white. So the government designed to classify biracial people as their own race. Biracial people could marry and have kids with other biracial people, but that was it. If a black mother was seen with her biracial child, she could be arrested and thrown into jail for having sex with a white man, and vice versa. There was also a fourth category race that was created. They called it the Asian race, and by that they meant people from Pakistan and India. All of the legal separation and segregation between different races also encouraged the government to require non-white citizens to have an identification card on their person at all times. At any moment, you could be stopped by law enforcement agents and asked to see your ID. Your ID would contain the information about where you lived. If you were outside of the legal lines, then you would be arrested on the spot. In all public places where people of different races had no choice but to be together, they would still have little to no contact with each other. There was things like white and non-white bathrooms, water fountains, trains, cars, waiting areas, and so much more. Having most of South Africa's population being non-white, there was a lot of resistance to the apartheid. Although the government controllers were white, the actual majority of the people in the population were not. People in South Africa took a stand to protest against the apartheid. They had peaceful protests, political strikes, and resistance that took place without violence. Although as time went on and little to no progress was being made, people got feisty, and armed protests and riots began. In 1972, a large meeting was held. The attendees of the meeting were there to come up with a plan to end the apartheid. They believed that Africa was one for all who wanted to live there. They believed that no matter what your race was, that Africa had a place for you. When all the words spread out about the meeting, the government caught word and decided to shut it down. That day, they arrested over 150 people and convicted them of treason. The white police in South Africa became very violent, and they started killing unarmed black people in unimaginable numbers. The police arrested as many anti-apartheid leaders and followers as they possibly could in order to keep their power. In 1962, one of the most well-known political leaders was arrested for protesting against South Africa's government and the apartheid. The political leader was known as Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was taken to trial and convicted. He was sentenced to life in prison. It is a perfect example of just how cruel and inflexible the South African government really was. On Nelson Mandela's trial date, he stood at the witness stand and made the following statement. During my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to the struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if need be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. He sums up perfectly what thousands of people were feeling. So many of them just wanted to live in peace and harmony. They wanted equality both socially and politically. The support of the South African apartheid then came down in a crash. The first event that set it off was the killing of a bunch of black students, made by white police officers. The event happened in 1976, when thousands of African American students from Soweto, in the township of Johannesburg, protested against the Afrikaans language. The language was a requirement for all students to speak. The Afrikaans language was the language of the National Party, which again, they were the ones who started the apartheid. The police ended up opening fire, shooting bullets, and spraying tear gas in the students' faces. This event in particular drew international attention to what was going on in South Africa. People all across the world began protesting and fighting for the rights of people in South Africa and to end the apartheid. It became more well known and understood what the apartheid was really about and how it was not peaceful or equal. This caused the National Party to lose popularity, and they were forced to backtrack on their actions. The government reversed the interracial marriage and sexual relationship ban, as well as many other segregation acts and laws. In 1973, the apartheid was officially denounced. To help the country get back on their feet, other allies from around the world sent economic aid. The repercussions of the apartheid still heavily linger throughout the country. Although it does not happen because of law, segregation throughout neighborhoods is still very distinct. The poverty statistic is much higher for blacks due to history of suppression, and the living conditions in the black neighborhoods are not sanitary. Unemployment rates are high, and there's little to no white people that are living below the poverty line.